Welcome to CC Group's latest webinar, where we're going to talk about the buying habits of businesses when it comes to purchasing security, specifically against the backdrop of the pandemic that we find ourselves in. So we're going to dig into how the investment landscape has evolved, what factors are driving the market, and specifically what are the channels and content that they're paying attention to. And importantly, how brand awareness comes into play, but also to drive selection and actually choose a supplier. And why have we done this? So we've done this research, which we're here to talk about today, but we've done it because the best possible way of designing a marketing strategy that delivers is to really put a very big focus on ROI. So this data-driven insights report is just going to help security vendors make the right marketing decisions. And I'm very excited to discuss the results with my fellow panelists today. So we will have a look at some housekeeping rules. And we are, first to say, is we're recording this webinar and we're making it available to anybody that needs it after the event. Anybody that's joined today is muted. However, we would love you to contribute to the conversation. So please do send messages and comments and ask questions. You can do this as part of the group, or you can private message me. And we'll be responding to your questions throughout. So you can point those directly to spokespeople, but if not, I can take that on as chair. Wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you for including me too, Katie. I'm really excited to be here.
No worries, and it's great to have you, Sarah. Really great to have you. Fabulous. So we will do introductions. And so first, I am Katie DeCosa, and I'm Head of Enterprise Technology at CC Group. We are a B2B technology-focused PR agency. And my history in sort of my career is 20 years doing business-to-business technology. For really any company that sells to enterprises, and a big part of that's been security. So after starting in the IBM press office, I've worked both agency side and in-house side for lots of different companies, big and small, brands like Fujitsu, Cisco, VMware, down to sort of more niche players in the DDoS space like Arbor Networks. I've been at CC Group for coming up to 4 years now, and I head up the enterprise tech stream. And I'll hand over to Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for including me in this presentation. I am a 30-year, I hate to age myself, but I am a 30-year PR journalism veteran in a lot of which is in cybersecurity. I had a PR agency in Los Angeles for 10 years where I worked with Symantec for 7 of those 10 years, which for those of you who know agency client relationships, 7 years is like 700 years in dog years. So a lot of experience there. I now work for Sophos, the global PR director, and I head up public relations and social media for Sophos, which is a global cybersecurity company. And I live and breathe cybersecurity every single second of the day.
Yeah, you really do. And I have to say, I just love that description of the client agency relationship. It's just, yeah, those long-term relationships are my favorites. I love it. And David Weeks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. And I'm David Weeks. I head up at Enable, what we call our partner experience division. And lucky enough, I've been with the company for 12 years and I get to travel the world. So I spend my time all over the place, seeing what the market's doing, how it's moving forward, and how people need to adapt to that market, and obviously continue to drive their revenue streams and opportunities and so forth. So we primarily focus on the service provider space, the MSP space, but as well, we do some stuff outside in IT Pro, enterprise, et cetera. So we get that combination of all of those different views in the marketplace. So looking forward to the chat today.
That's wonderful, and I love it. I mean, you both bring such kind of rich experience to the table, from a security perspective, from a vendor perspective, but also not just thinking about that direct selling model, but also that channel model as well, which is obviously important to both companies. That's wonderful. Thank you both so much. Wonderful. So Let me just sort of set this up by saying that at the beginning of last year, purchasing cycles for security solutions were definitely subject to some sudden and widespread disruption. I think we all know that in March 2020, the world flipped on its head. And as the structure of organizations changed, there was this heightened demand. I think we can definitely describe it as an unprecedented demand for security. But what does this sort of the pandemic effect mean for businesses today? It really means that security vendors are selling products in a very new market environment. And that's been brought on by very permanent changes in the way that people work. So communications preferences and the perception of value is really changing. And those vendors have to rise to the challenge of selling in what is a much harsher economic context. And they really need to be very precise and targeted and considered when they make these investments for marketing and communications. But the news isn't bad at all. So the market for security products is definitely very much alive. And the majority of companies are searching for new products. So if we move on to that next slide. Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, this really just sort of shows how buoyant the market is. So as you can see, 4 out of 5 companies are searching for new security suppliers. That's 80%. That's a serious majority, and 78% of them, so more than 3/4, had to make an unplanned purchase to meet the needs during the course of this pandemic. I mean, ticket price wise, that's a significant amount, £800,000 per ticket. But interestingly, we can see here that there's a very, very ripe opportunity. But 1/3 of those companies describe knowing who to choose as one of the biggest obstacles to getting their security purchases over the line. So I think, vendors, this is where we can help them. Like, how can we influence them and help them make that decision? Wonderful. So now we're going to have a look at security investments and the state of security investments, and start with the market drivers. So what are the factors which are inspiring these businesses to spend on security? And here are the results. And I want to kick off with you, David, and just really ask what your view is. Like, anything surprising or particularly validating here on this page?
Yeah, I think that there's a few areas here that I would pull out. When we look at technology advances, I think that also plays into this concept of an evolving security landscape, threat actors on a regular basis. I think, when you look at that, it plays into the keeping up with threats. And as you bring in new infrastructure, new technologies, your security posture needs to change. And what I see with this, though, is that regulatory demands at 50%, I believe, will start to move up to the front. We see globally, we see governments getting a lot more involved in pushing how they want cyber hygiene to work within organizations. And we're going to see that change. We're going to see that a multitude of different people out in the industry, whether it be business owners, IT providers, et cetera, are all going to have to meet a certain level of regulation and work together. And I think it is the right move. And I think it is what needs to be done. So I think you will see that move up. The technology advances and keeping up with threats will always be there. And I think there'll be a close second and third. But ultimately, it's businesses need to start to prepare for that today. And the way that we're educating and messaging to the market, we need to prepare them for that.
Absolutely. What do you think, Sarah?
So I've studied this slide quite a bit, and I actually was surprised that attack response was so low. As somebody who's really in tune with how cyber attacks take place, I think businesses need to be paying attention to that more, and that needs to factor much more into their buying decisions because of how the attacks take place, how fast they're changing, and what the potential damage is. Yes, technology advances can address those things, but until you know what you need to address, technology advances could be the wrong thing. Like, you could be buying the wrong technology advance if you don't know what exactly you're defending against. And so I would like to see that flip. So I would rather see the attack response as the bigger bubble, then keeping up with threats, then regulatory demands, then technology advances to inform these buying decisions.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, there's a huge amount of sense in that. I think that's such an interesting perspective. That's great. And when we look at the next slide, I think this is an interesting one. So with this one, we asked the question around priority areas where new security technology is being applied. And the thing that struck me was, if we look back over the past sort of 3 to 5 years, you know, digital transformation has been very much at the forefront of IT spending, not just security spending. But, you know, seeing this, and I know it's marginal, but it's certainly bigger in terms of percentage points. You know, the staff working from home element has obviously been the biggest priority for organizations. It's that, how can we protect our teams? How can we really acknowledge and think about the new perimeter, as it were?
I think that I think that a lot of this was already happening pre-COVID, and then COVID put a spotlight on the need to be able to secure BYOD, secure IoT, in working from home. I mean, those were already things that our universe, our world, our work world was doing. It was probably just not as secure as it needed to be. But the fact that everybody shifted to working from home really put a spotlight on the need to protect devices that you're using at your home, from your home for work, et cetera. And so I think from a technology buying standpoint, I think that anyone looking at future purchase, like how you buy now for the future, like definitely this is something that you need to be looking at, because of the way it's only going to not only stay but change, so that you are protected with whatever device. Like David travels around the world, like his laptop needs to be secure no matter what country he's in, depending on how that country accesses data or doesn't access data, whether you're in China or Finland or the US or LATAM. Like every geographical region has different regulations for how they may or may not allow device and networking security in their country. So I think that this is something that you really need to be paying attention to.
And David, what I'm thinking about from your perspective is, you know, for Enable, the focus is on, as you mentioned, service providers, managed service providers, the companies that are responsible for, in the main, kind of small, medium businesses to mid-market, their IT suites. When you look at this slide in the context of that community, does that reflect what you're seeing?
I mean, obviously the work from home, there was a dramatic shift. When COVID hit. And I think to Sarah's point, there was always flex days. But this really took a service provider who managed an office, say with 30, 40, 50 people, and turned 50 offices.
That's a great point.
And that was a big difference for a service provider. And that then enhanced the BYOD, because now we have not only corporate owned devices, but, you know, their kids' personal devices are connecting to the network and so forth. All of that created a security gap and a risk. And what it also did was it forced a lot of businesses to actually level up their technology, where maybe they hadn't been making the right investments, and they suddenly had to do that. And I think that's a lot of where you see, you know, to the previous slides, the 800,000 pound tickets and so forth. Investments had to be made to ensure connectivity and productivity. Now, digital transformation is an interesting one. And the way that we look at it is we almost see that as overarching to all of this. And, you know, transformation gives this impression that there's an end point, and there isn't. It's an evolution, and it's going to continue over time. Just the way we access technology and data, and like Sarah was saying, ensuring that you have the proper protections wherever you are in the world, those will continue to evolve. And we see that, you know, I see it in first world to second to third world countries that I visit, and the evolution of the way that you're interacting with that technology infrastructure of the country. So this is going to be a continual evolvement. And I at the end of this as your future opportunity, but I think it's going to come a lot quicker than most people think, that this is just going to become a comprehensive view of security overlay to infrastructure, and that'll be the posture moving forward.
I love that point, and I really love that description of digital evolution, not digital transformation. I think that's something we can all get behind. That's great.
And I feel bad for the IT guys and gals going from one office to 50 offices overnight.
Yeah.
That was a good point, David.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. We had to do it as a business, just over 3,000 employees, and we were able to turn that around in a couple of days. It was amazing what even service providers, IT departments did, how quickly they moved people to home. But then it was the flow of help desk tickets and the reactive issues, and that's what happened. It was an interesting time for the first month or so until it started to calm down maybe a little bit more. So it's going to be interesting as we have that shift back to a hybrid, what will be and the impact then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the jury's still out there, but it's gonna, we're sort of on the cusp of just moving back in, and again, learning as we go. I think, we did learn a lot from the transition to hybrid and working at home, but I think this semi bricks and mortar work from home, work from Starbucks lifestyle is gonna ebb and flow until, we know what the future looks like.
It's going to be a really interesting time. I'm actually super curious, as I've got you both here, but how are each of your organizations approaching that return to the office, or a hybrid environment?
It's interesting. We just did a town hall yesterday for the company with our president, and we've actually put out a survey asking our staff, how do you want to return to work? And what we realized was, I think a lot of organizations thought people had to be in an office to create productivity, and this showed that a lot of people can work from anywhere. And are we going to get rid of our physical office space? Absolutely not. And I don't believe most businesses will. People want interaction, they want camaraderie, they want all of that. But I think there's going to be a lot more flex work that's going to happen in the future. And that's going to be the big differential that we see. And that's what we're looking at. But ultimately, we want to hear from our teams, and how do you want to interact with us moving forward? And then we'll find a healthy balance there for the company.
Yeah, we're pretty much same.
It's that employee-led approach, isn't it? And I think, the companies that don't do that, I think they risk being left behind, because from a talent perspective, you want a choice now, right?
Absolutely.
We've enjoyed this trust and freedom.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So moving on to the next slide. Thanks so much, Andrea. So now this is where we really kind of start to dig into the weeds. So when it comes to kind of creating awareness, we ask the question, how much of an influence do the following channels have on your awareness of a security technology supplier? I'm absolutely amazed, really. I think it was incredibly telling that industry-specific events came out top. And if you think about the timing of this survey, so this went out very at the beginning of 2021. We were very much deep in lockdown still. But it really just underpins, I think, the value that people put into events.
Yeah, I actually was shocked by that, because I thought people might appreciate this reprieve of not being physically at events, but people really do want to look people in the eye, have a handshake or an elbow bump, just really network and communicate. So I thought that was a really interesting stat that was really at the top. And then I thought another piece was interesting is that social media was at the bottom, because a lot of people think that social media needs to be at the top. But in terms of creating awareness, like that very top of the funnel piece, that layer of social media has more impact when it's further down. When you already have the people snagged in, like when your customer base is snagged in, it's a great way to reinforce how you treat your customers, what you're doing for them, versus like the top of the funnel awareness. So I think that the key takeaway for me on this slide is that you need to have multiple layers of impact. Whether it's first meeting somebody for the first time at a trade show or meeting up again after 1 year of not seeing them at a trade show. It's reading the industry trades or having some impact in the industry trades, having your PR machine, talking to the industry trades, doing those other business events like direct marketing, et cetera, that you see here. Another thing that I found really interesting on this slide is that the industry and trade media was #2. Because I will tell you, a lot of top line executives and a lot of salespeople think that the coverage for awareness really needs to be heavy hitting in the business and national media. But really, it's the industry and trade press that is, that peer influence, that industry expert influence, that is really, really important in terms of building credibility with a company or a product or a service.
Yeah, I loved the way that came out so high. I think, and Sarah, I know you'll have experience of this as well, but there's a lot of I think ego that can come around wanting those big brand hits, and they're important for the brand, and it's always a win. It's always a win to get that coverage in a leading national, and it excites everyone. It's fantastic, but the impact is 100% made in the trades, because that's where you go. That's where you go for your specialist relevant information. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think the takeaway here, or the motto should be for the listeners and the people joining this webinar, is that it's multiple layers of impact, because you are going to get a benefit out of the business press. There's no doubt about it. Having that household name visibility is really important. But at the end of the day, when it comes to actually buying a product or service, it's the industry influencers that write about the product or service in the industry and trade outlets that are probably going to get the buyer over the line.
Absolutely. I also thought the way that the Humble web search appeared, so that was sort of relatively high up in the leaderboard, and sort of scored higher than some of those other what we might consider to be major channels. I thought that was really interesting. I think, to me, that emphasizes how important SEO is in influencing buyer behavior.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. Yeah, but like you say, it's all about the mix. It's all about the mix. What did you think, David?
Yeah, I think it's similar to Sarah's point. It shows that the purchaser is looking for validation, and a multitude of different areas for that. I agree with what Sarah said. Social has actually a huge impact on all of this, because it drives you to start to do your research. People want to self-help. They do. And what's the first thing that we do when we're looking for something? We Google it, right? That's what we do. And then from there, you find the most trusted pieces that you want to learn from. And so I think it's right. You need to have a varied approach in the way that you're putting that messaging and that education out there. And if you're focusing on a single channel, your addressable market's going to be very tiny, and you have the impact that you want. So I think this just shows how close everything is, that people are going to a multitude. To Sarah's point, I always wanted to be at events in person, but I'm a little bit different because I'm on the road all the time. So but I think a big part of those industry events is people can sit in front of a peer and validate their thoughts. And when you're virtual, you can't. And so I think back to that, because it's a lot more difficult to be able to ultimately get with somebody who you believe and trust, to be able to say, I'm going to bounce this idea off of you. Do you agree, or am I on the wrong track? And that's what we lost, and that's where we're seeing virtual fatigue.
Definitely. What's interesting, so you'll both know there's a huge security event in the UK called Info Security, and it always takes place in the summer. It was obviously fully virtual last year. It has a virtual event planned for June and an in-person event planned for July. So yeah, there's hope and there's intention there.
Yes.
We've had a really good point here from David. I think it's David in the chat function. So tech trade media is shrinking rapidly. Many ad-based models are obsolete, and the publishers are near insolvency. So this is definitely a challenge, and I think we're seeing the market under a huge amount of pressure, and I'd agree with you on that, David, for sure.
Yeah, and can I address that? So I think
absolutely.
that that's a great point, David, and I think that one of the important things to note too is that a lot of the outlets that are still standing and surviving are actually syndicating globally too. So if you have a global business, like we tend to prioritize some of the trade outlets that we know are going to reach globally, because they're going to have that reach. And we still layer up with like certain regional press programs, but there are a couple of key outlets that do syndicate in multiple languages. And I think that's a trend we're probably going to see more of.
I think that's very true. I think the other thing that also kind of springs to my mind as I look at this slide is the peso approach. So, ensuring that mix of paid, earned, shared, and owned. You've got the paid activity you can do around many of these channels. You've got earned, which is all about your earned media coverage. So this is the tech trade media, the business and nationals. You've got the shared, so anything you do on social, anything visual, webinars, video, etc. And then owned, that's around the kind of blog content and company information as well. So yeah, that's great. And thanks for that input, David. That's really a really important point. Wonderful. And Andre, if we could move to the next slide. Great. So yeah, so we're moving beyond that simple awareness piece now to selection, and how vendors are identified as suitable for buyers' needs. And I think these 2 points at the top here are really interesting. So it's about that influence from third-party independents. So that could be the professional consultants and advisors or the industry analysts. And I think to me, it really underlines the value of cultivating and maintaining those business relationships, and making sure that the regular networking is happening, because it's really important to get their advocacy over to the brands when those buyers are making a final decision. So I thought that was really interesting. And just a point that industry analyst reports consistently, because we've done similar research at CCgroup into different areas, whether it's mobile and telecoms or fintech, and industry analyst reports really do tend to come out high.
Yeah, I think if you look at this, I think people might actually utilize this as a bottom-up approach. So as they hear and research, then their validation is at the top. And industry analyst reports and professionals and consultants, they have been able to portray and execute themselves as an industry expert. And so people look to them. It's similar to what we had through COVID. We all listened to science tables and to medical officers of health, and they're the ones who told us what we needed to do because they were deemed and promoted as the industry expert. And so as a result, we followed that. That's what's happened here. And so aligning yourself with those areas and being able to market and sell through those will bring a lot of credibility. I think it's something vendors for years have been trying to do is say we are the industry expert. We are in an area, but there's always that underlying, you have an ulterior motive, and which we do, we want to sell. Just what vendors do. So I think in a lot of cases, there is a bottom up here is the way that I see it. But really that validation is sitting at the top.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I agree with that completely. Bottom up for sure. I don't see any red flags on this. This seems really normal, natural. I would say, maybe longstanding brand awareness is a little too high, perhaps, only because I feel like, there could be a startup with a better way. Like I feel like innovation is a key driver, and longstanding companies don't always have the most innovation. Many of them do, but I think just in the fast-paced world that we live in, something new, like the whole Nest product, market disruptors sometimes those are the companies that you might want to be looking at to shake things up a little bit. So that is one outlier I was surprised about.
Absolutely.
I would agree. I love my Nest system.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Brilliant. Thank you. And Andre, if you could move on to the next slide. Great. So we've talked about channels, but now it's all about content. And we asked that question around which type of content has the most influence on a buyer's selection of a security technology supplier. There's something that strikes me about those top two, and it's both industry analyst reports and white papers provide a really deep level of detail that aids buyers during that selection process. It's about technical specifications on products and services for white papers, and that kind of makes them make tangible decisions. You know, it might for specific RFP criteria, and then analyst reports are potentially, you know, really kind of supporting on that supplier's reputation, how flexible they are, kind of their abilities. So yeah, that was what struck me from this one. How about you guys?
I'm surprised that blogs were so high, because that's like basically marketing spiel. So, I mean, nothing against blogs, but they don't tend to be as credible from a news value standpoint as, say, a press article from a well-respected journalist. You know, I noticed that press releases are down at the bottom, which that's fine. I thought, I would think it might be a little bit, those two might be switched. But press releases, again, are coming right from the company. It's not a piece of news coverage from a third party journalist. I mean, that's the whole value of PR, is that it's a third party source, it's third party credibility. So I would have expected maybe opinion articles and news articles to be a little bit higher here than say blogs.
I wonder, you know, on the blog point of view, that it's less about company blogs. So company says X, but I think what we're certainly seeing with our clients is that the blogs we write, or that we're kind of working on for our clients, they come from people. So I wonder if this reflects that trend, that people are listening to people. I think we talked about PASO, paid, earned, shared, and owned, and I think, you know, obviously blogs sit under the owned category, and I wonder if, you know, people are really starting to pay attention to those as a channel, and sort of searching them out, and obviously taking notice of them when they read them. That's potentially what's happening.
Yeah, and I see that David also put in a note into the chat, and I completely agree. Savvy vendors develop more business outcome-oriented blogs that are more credible than those focused on speeds and feeds. And I agree with that. And speaking of speeds and feeds, like we've backed away from that in our press releases, because God, no one cares about that anymore. It's so boring. But the outcome, like you're saying, like David is saying, that is interesting. And so I think applying that to your media relations strategy is also important.
Oh, 100%.
I think like we've taken blogs a little bit of a different direction as well too, in that a lot of our blogs are actually written by, in our group, we call them the head nerds. They're industry experts, and we have a security nerd and an automation nerd and sales and marketing. And they're talking about their industry experience, and more to our existing partners, but external. And it's not that sales pitch. And we're finding that we're getting a lot of engagement with that. It's helping. I think that plays into the case studies, because the case studies, you can bring the peer-to-peer engagement in. And again, you know, that's what people look for. We found that the more that we bring peers in to justify our message, we get a much higher engagement rate across what we're doing, and in all areas of our business. And so what we're trying to do is actually use our advocates within our base to actually be a lot of the voice for us moving forward. And we're finding a lot of success with it.
That's great. David, anything else on there that's kind of surprising or validating?
Well, the healthcare and social media, and when we looked at this before, I was very confused by that. And then because I felt that they would definitely be an area to go to industry analyst reports. But then as I thought about it more over the last few days, I'm wondering if they're following on social industry associations and such a heavy reliance there. I would need to understand that more, but just, saying that, healthcare looks to social media to influence their security supplier, there's got to be more there. It can't just be, the average CISO posting on Twitter that's convincing them to make a buying decision.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good call on the associations, because, hugely important for the health sector. Yeah. What do you think about the retail sector and email marketing, Sarah?
I think that probably rang true. I didn't see any red flags there. That I was, in general, I was surprised that email marketing was so high, because I have this impression that it's like so 2000s. But people still love email.
Absolutely, they do. And I guess for all the emails, all the email sort of marketing messages that come through to us and land in our inbox, there will be a gem.
Yeah.
So, it's just oversubscribed, but if it works sometimes, then it can really work, can't it?
Maybe it's because we're all so busy on email that it's like one location to get all your information. And so maybe that's, I'm just guessing here, I'm spitballing, but bear with me, stay with me on this theory, is that you're already dealing with all your work emails. You might as well get a marketing email and be like,
Absolutely.
I agree. And there are gems. I actually got one this morning, just really interesting, out of the blue, drew me into a case study, which was really interesting to me, of another vendor, not a competitor, that I'm very interested in learning more about now. So those gems come through, but you're right. The problem I find with email marketing is when I get really busy and that stuff comes in, it becomes a frustration and it's just deleted.
Absolutely. And it can damage your brand. It can damage your relationship with the brand as well, if there's overkill and you've received too many, for sure.
Yeah,
so it's got to be gotten right.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Cool. Okay. I know we're coming up to time. So if we move on to the next slide, Andrea. Thank you. You're doing a fabulous job here. Brilliant. Yeah, so thank you for this discussion today. I think, in terms of takeaways, it's obviously clear that, people are buying security, lots of them. So there's a huge prime opportunity there. And I think, there seem to be some highlights around those major channels of influence, major content that is, driving selection. And I think we've talked around many of them today, but from industry analysts to the event activity, trade media and the importance of that, I think, like you say, Sarah, it's about integrating them all for maximum effect. Because I think where you can hit across them, then it really works. And I just wanted to close out, actually, there's a couple of questions that came through to me ahead of this session that people were interested in asking you as a result of reading the research. The first one was around messages. So the question was, how about messages? So should I change them depending on channel? Is that one you'd like to take, Sarah?
Sure. Yes. So my response to that is, you need to have an overarching message, like an overarching theme, but then you could bespoke those individual messages for the sub audiences. But just make sure that it is always tying to the greater mission or the greater vision of what you're trying to communicate. But definitely, by all means, tweak what you need to your audience. Absolutely.
Such an important point. Yeah, having that sort of overarching, whether you call it a purpose, a vision, a mission, and then making sure that everything rolls up to that is crucial. That's great.
Yeah, and I think that, specifically, as I mentioned, I'm more of a media relations expert, and that's kind of like PR 101, is that you tailor your media pitches to the journalist beat, to the outlet, But it's not just the outlet. It's really like digging down and understanding what a journalist is specifically covering that day, that week, that month, so that you can appeal to him or her, and what their news nuances are, so that you can, get the story, get the coverage that you need. And so I would say apply that type of mentality and technique to other aspects, other areas that we had on that list, that bar chart list. For your email marketing, are you going after XYZ? Make sure that it's tailored to that particular audience. And I think it's hard work, and you have to do a lot of upfront, but at the end of the day, it pays off, and you look smarter, and you probably will see more results.
Absolutely. There was another question that came in, which I think was a really pertinent one, which was all around, I mean, we've actually put across the message here, and I think we did this within the research as well, that there's a real importance to kind of take notice of all channels. But the question came in: as a marketer with a limited budget, how should I prioritize? So which channels and content types should I focus on?
I think that depends on what you're selling, like what type of company you are. Are you selling a service? Are you selling a product? Is it both? Are you trying to build image and awareness? So I think, first of all, study that, and then think about where you're going to have the most bang for your buck, and then monitor it. I mean, I think, setting up some sort of testing so that you can, and tracking results is really important. And then don't be afraid to course correct, and don't be afraid to try things. That's really important. I think there's a lot of pressure, especially when you have limited budgets, to get it right the first time. And that just doesn't happen. That's not real. Like, marketers need to be able to try things, like, and feel inspired and excited to try things. And that worked, great, let's duplicate it. That didn't work, all right, we'll never doing that again. But at least we tried, and we learned something from it, because you do always learn something from whatever you're doing. And then you can apply it in other ways.
It's so true. And thankfully, I think we're in a place where these things have never been more measurable. So it feels that, we're just getting more and more tools at our disposal, which enable us to do this. So, but yeah, I so agree with you on that, Sarah. Don't be afraid to fail,
Yeah, and we tend to use measurement tools, and you're absolutely right. There's so many measurement tools out there now, like that's a whole other industry. But from we use measurement tools to help set strategy. It's not just reporting into executives to say, oh, wow, look how great we are. It's to set strategy and course correct. Having the ability to course correct is a huge career thing for people to learn how to do, so that you can say, okay, this is working, this is not working. The analytics are showing me that I'm having this impact here, but not over here. So I tend to analyze our measurement to refine strategy. And I think that that's really important. And I think a lot of people miss that, because they're so focused and under so much pressure to deliver our ROI, that they lose sight of using those tools to their own benefit.
I would agree. It's interesting. Yesterday, we were looking at some of our analytics and our tracking, and we do that on a weekly basis in different areas of the business. And we were looking at things that we do across affinity groups and social and so forth, and how our dollars played out in our ROI. And we're doing a lot of work on that. And to Sarah's point, you've got to be able to try things. We're doing that. We just kind of have this rule in the company: if you're going to fail fast, and that's okay. And then try something new. And that. But what we've spent a lot of time doing work on is the persona of the buyer, and trying those new messages and those new channels. But we haven't just done it to who we typically sell to. We're actually analyzing the persona of the end user that we don't interact. And so we have a pass-through message that we can use in a lot of our marketing. And we're seeing a lot of success with that, actually. And it's been very interesting to do that research.
That's so interesting. I love that. Brilliant. Okay then, both. Well, we're slightly over time, but this has been a wonderful discussion. I've really enjoyed speaking with you both, and honestly, I cannot wait until we're all able to meet up at one of the big security events, wherever in the world it may be. And
I'm there.
and actually,
whenever it happens, I'm going to be there.
yeah, have a hug and break bread together, and it will be wonderful. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. Thank you, attendees. Thank you for the input and the contribution. And please do connect with us on LinkedIn and follow up with any questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.